Good morning, everybody. Okay, so here's our lesson for today. You can feel free to pause, rewind, fast forward, however you want to do this, that's fine. So today we're going to talk about coordinate planes, and coordinate planes is just a fancy word for a graph that's split into four sides, okay? So a graph that has four parts to it. We also call this a Cartesian plane, and again, this is just a fancy word for a graph that has four parts, four sections. Okay. On my graph, just like a regular graph that I would see, I'm going to have an x-axis that is my horizontal axis. That means that my axis is running from my left-hand side to my right-hand side. That's my horizontal axis. I'm going to have a y-axis that runs vertically or up and down. So I go from down all the way up. Okay. I can have a scale. So a scale is just numbers on my graph. So I might say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every block is 1. Okay, so every block is 1. I'm putting numbers on here. I'm letting people know what I'm counting by. In the middle here, where both my x and my y axes cross, that's the point 0, 0. We also call this the origin. And at the origin, again, this is where the x and y axis cross. Okay. And very last, like we talked about before, I can have what's called quadrants, and quadrants are just how my graph is split. So quadrants, like a quad, means that there's 4. And I start by labeling my quadrants. My first one is always my upper right-hand side. That's always labeled number 1. Then I go counterclockwise. That's 2, 3, and 4. And this is how they're always labeled. It goes in this order. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And there's some important things that happen in these quadrants. If I'm looking at quadrant 1 and I want to compare it to my x and my y values, I notice that my y here is on the upside and it's positive. My scale is positive. I'm only dealing with positive numbers. And if I'm dealing with my x, I know that I'm also only dealing with positive numbers. Those are all of the numbers on the right-hand side here. So my x and my y are positive in my quadrant 1. In quadrant 2, I notice that my x, now I'm on the left-hand side, and I'm dealing with negatives here. I notice that that's negative 5 here. So my x is negative, but my y is still on the upside. It's still positive here. My numbers there are still positive. So I have negative x, but positive y. And when I look in 3, now I notice my y is negative, my x is negative, and so is my y. My values are still negative there. And in number 4, my x is positive now. I'm on the right-hand side. We are dealing with a positive scale here, but my y is negative. Okay. And I notice a trend here. I notice that if I'm looking just at the upper side of my graph here in quadrants 1 and 2, I notice that my y's are always positive on that upper side. I'm dealing with the positive values here, just like if I was going up in temperature. And on my lower side, I notice that I'm dealing with negative temperatures or negative values here, just like on a thermometer. My x's, if I just compare right to left, just right to left here. I know my x's are all positive here on my right-hand side, and my x's are all negative on the left-hand side. So these are some things that I'm noticing here, okay? But this is essentially what a Cartesian plane is. So this is what we're going to talk about for the next little bit. Okay. So when I'm looking at this, I want to look and be able to label things on a graph, but I also need to know what the question is asking me to do. So we need to learn some important words here. And one of the first things that we talk about is this idea of an ordered pair. And an ordered pair can also be called a point or a coordinate. It can actually be called two things. And my point or my coordinate always looks like this. It always looks like an X and then a Y. So I would have numbers here. Instead of an X, I could have a number, and instead of a Y, I could have a number. But my X always comes first. X always comes first, and the Y always comes second. So X always comes first, the Y always comes second. So when I'm plotting this, when I'm graphing this, I'm going to start at the origin. I'm going to start at 0, 0. Remember that that's my fancy word for where my X and my Y cross, 0, 0. And I'm going to use the X, which is my first number, to move left or right. If my X is positive, I'm going to move right. If my X is negative, I'm going to move left. Then I'm going to use my Y, which is the second number, to move up or down. Okay? And a helpful way to remember is that when you go to a hotel, you have to go left or right to find the elevator before you can go up or down. Okay, so you have to find the elevator first before it's going to move you up or down. So let's plot some of these points. So I'm going to start by labeling my graph. I'm actually going to make my graph a little bit bigger here so that we can see it. And I'm going to label this X and Y. So I know which axes I have. My horizontal axis going left to right, remember that's my X. My vertical axis going up and down, that's my Y. Okay? And the first point that I'm looking at here is -4 and 6. And just so that we can see everything, I'm going to start by plotting my origin. So that red dot, that's where I'm starting from. It's my starting point. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to find -4 on my x-axis. So here, I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4. That's -4 right there. And I'm just going to hover my pen over there, and I'm going to look to see what my y is. So remember, this always goes x, then y. So I found -4 on my x-axis, and it says that y is +6. So now I'm going to move up 6 squares. I'm going to move up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's my point here. I went -4 and then up 6. And that's my point. This is going to be point A. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing for B now. B is at x is 2. So I'm going to find 2 on my x-axis, which is right here. And now instead of going up, I'm going to go down 3 because it says it's -3. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. So that's it right here. B. I'm going to try C now. So C, I'm going to go to -6, down to 4. Notice I'm always going X first, then Y. just like the alphabet. And then in D, I'm going to go to 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm moving left to right first. Up 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And these are my points now. So if I'm looking at this, I can see on my graph here, remember that if I was, oops, sorry guys. If I were to label this, that this would be quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to label these. So it's saying which point is in quadrant 1. So I'm going to put, that's D. I notice that in quadrant 1 here, I have D. Which point's in quadrant 2? Well, in quadrant 2, I have A. Quadrant 3, I have C. And quadrant 4, I have B. Okay? And now I want you guys to pause this for a second, and I want you to try to plot E, F, G, and H. And again, I'm just finding 0, going up to 6 now, that's F. Finding -7 on my x-axis, not moving up or down because there's nothing there. And then finding 0 going down 3. And I notice that all 4 of these points now are on my axes, and they're actually not in any quadrants. These are actually intercepts. Just like how you might intercept a ball, you're going in between two things. Okay, so we call these intercepts because they're in between two quadrants. So they're not actually inside of a quadrant. They're just sitting in between the two of them. So today's lesson is all about graphing. It's all about how we do these little graphs here. And we can do this forwards or backwards. I can give you the points and ask you to graph them, or I can ask you to look at the points and tell me what their coordinates are. And remember, my coordinates are always going to go X, then Y. So if I'm looking at A here, I'm going to drop my pencil down so that my A is touching my X axes. And again, let's start by labeling our axes. So my X is always going left to right. My Y is always going up and down. So I'm going to look here and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to draw my line down here. I notice that this is touching at 5. Okay, I notice that this is touching at 5 here. So my X point is going to be 5. My Y point now is going to go from here all the way over. I have to see how many we went up. We went up 3. So my coordinate here is 5 and 3, and I can double check this. If I start at 0 and I go over 5 and then up 1, 2, 3, I'm touching my point. Okay. I want you to pause this and I want you to try to do B, C, E, F, and G, please. Okay, so I've written the answers in here. If you have questions with this, please just make sure you send me an email. But just quickly as a recap, I'm always writing my X first. So I'm figuring out where on this horizontal axis I've moved left or right and writing that number down. If I'm moving left, that's going to be a negative number. So here I went left to 6, So that's -6, and I went down 4. So my point here is going to be -6, -4. Notice that I'm always writing my coordinates inside of a set of brackets, and that's really important. That's what we have to do. But this is it for the lesson today. So it's short, it's sweet. The worksheet is posted on Brightspace. Please try that. If you have any questions, let me know. And hopefully the weather will cooperate so that we can go live again tomorrow, and I will see you guys then.